That's something that wasn't going on in first century Judaism. The priests were, for the most part, located throughout all of Palestine, although the chief priests were located in Jerusalem itself. In addition to the priests and the chief priests, there were zealots and sicarii. We've talked about those over the last couple of weeks. These are the terrorists who were absolutely livid with Rome and sought to destabilize the government and restore Jewish sovereignty, and ultimately are the folks who got the Jews in trouble with Rome toward the end of the first century. A final group are the Herodians. These were a quasi-militaristic group of police who were able to protect the families of the tetrarchs, Herod's family, in the middle part of the first century. There were other groups that we know even less about than these persons, who we know very little about. And that brings us then to the Sadducees. Who exactly were the Sadducees? Well, the simple way to talk about them is that they were aristocratic leaders who, for the most part, were in Jerusalem itself. The Sadducees were not located throughout all of Palestine. They were essentially within Jerusalem itself. They were part of the governing class, and they protected the status quo, which meant they were for themselves. They wanted to protect all things that they had, including their positions within the government. Well, what did they believe? There's a lot of things that we really don't know about the Sadducees, but one of the things we do know about them is that they were concerned only with the written law. By that I mean that the words that they find in Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, that's all that concerned them. They didn't care so much about the words that they would find in the prophets or in the writings. It was only the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And beyond that, they were involved in a very literal understanding of the words that they found in Torah. They weren't interested at all in the interpretive traditions that may have been out there. They didn't want to know what you thought about a particular law. They didn't even care about what Isaiah thought about a particular law. They were only concerned about the words as they were printed in the pages of Torah. That allowed them, interestingly enough, to have an ability to absolutely pay no attention to those words if they didn't think it applied to them. If the interpretive tradition doesn't matter, well then the actual words, if those words don't have some sort of application for them as they live today or tomorrow, then they would just ignore them, which was an easy way for them to essentially be unimpacted at all by the words of Scripture or by the God who put those words there. Because those 5 books of the Old Testament were established before they ever were exiled to Babylonia, they weren't influenced at all by the influences of Babylon or Persia, which meant that they had no interest at all in things like resurrection or demons or angels or heaven or hell or any other aspects of the afterlife. Well, how did they interact with Jesus? We probably think that the Sadducees had all kinds of interaction with Jesus, but the truth of the matter is that the Sadducees only had 2 interactions with Jesus within the entirety of the Gospels. The first time that the Sadducees interact with Jesus is in Matthew chapter 16. This is just right before the Transfiguration, and they ask Jesus some questions along with the Pharisees. It's essentially to assess Jesus' position upon the subject matter that they had in hand. The second time that they interact with Jesus is during Holy Week. This is in Matthew chapter 22, and this is the occasion when the Sadducees come up to Jesus and they want him to explain to them which one of these 7 brothers was going to be married to a woman who had been married to all 7 of the brothers during their lifetime. And Jesus just smiles at them, you'll recall, and says, "You guys don't even believe in resurrection. What do you care about the answer to this particular issue?" So, the Sadducees really had very little involvement whatsoever with Jesus. They tried to assess his beliefs on a couple of occasions, once about midway through his ministry, and the second time just a couple of days before he died. But they had absolutely no involvement whatsoever with his arrest or the trials that he underwent or with his crucifixion, unless some of the chief priests were themselves Sadducees. But if that wasn't the case, they had no involvement whatsoever with Jesus during that last week of his life, other than to ask those few questions to him on that one occasion. The Sadducees did have some involvement with the followers of Jesus. In Acts chapter 4 and in Acts chapter 5, they wanted to kill off Jesus's disciples. And there will be a Pharisee who takes issue with that and is able to win the occasion, and the disciples are able to live. But then another 25 years after that, the Sadducees will again try to kill off one of Jesus's apostles, this time St. Paul, and he is able to get out of that situation as well. But that is absolutely it. You get rid of those occasions with Jesus's apostles and the two occasions with the Sadducees back in Jesus's day, and that is absolutely it for the Sadducees with Jesus.
What happens? Oh no, that's no. How do I get it to play, Elizabeth?